Hello and welcome. I'm Bonnie Libhart and you're watching Vision Plus. And we have with us today someone that has come back from Saudi Arabia, and we're going to hear a different perspective. Her name is Jean Weaver and she owns a company called Sigma Services. Welcome back to the United States, to Alabama and to Huntsville.
Oh, thank you.
And to Victory Network.
It's great to be home.
Oh, I know it must be. Now, we don't think about the women going over there, but of course, quite a few of you were. Tell me about how it happened that you were over in Saudi Arabia.
Well, I belong to an Army Reserve unit here, the 75th Field Hospital, and they activated different individuals within the unit, and they reassigned us to other units that were going over. So I was involuntarily reassigned to the 251st Evacuation Hospital out of South Carolina, and I went over with them. There were about 15 of us from Huntsville that went with that particular unit. And they needed people to help fill their slots because they didn't have enough to run a hospital.
How did you feel that day you got that request?
Oh, scared and worried and thinking, everybody, they'd been gearing everybody up to go, and I had already been helping people in the unit get activated. So, it was upsetting to see others go and leave, and friends, and then to think that I was going and leaving my family and the children and friends. That was very hard and frightening.
Well, your business and your husband.
Yeah.
And how did the two of them, how many now?
There's three children.
3 children and your husband's son, the 4 of them cope with this?
I think they really did well. I'm really impressed. Carrie, who's the oldest, she ended up coming back from Tuscaloosa. She was going to college there, and she transferred to UAH for the 2 quarters. So she just came up here to help, and I think that was a big help to Tom, just with schedules and running the house and things like that. So that was a big help. As a matter of fact, she's just gone back to Tuscaloosa now to finish up. She'll graduate this summer. And then Sarah, who's the youngest, 13, she was going through the 8th grade with all those changes, getting ready for high school and volleyball and making the high school volleyball team. So she was active, and I think that helped her a lot. And I think she had a lot of support from friends and families within the school and church and stuff. I think it was a big help to her. But I think they did well.
And the middle one is always the one we don't talk about enough. But what is?
I think she's just very active. She's active in Grissom.
What's her name?
Beth.
Beth, right.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Very active in school and sports. So she did well and was working part-time and things. So I think they really did well. I think it was Tom had it the worst, being mother, father, and then also trying to run a company. I think
and then being concerned about you.
Right.
Wondering, am I going to get this little woman back?
Yeah.
Well, now, tell us what you did and how you felt about what you did.
Well, I went over with this unit, and I ended up being in charge of the emergency department and running the emergency room, and then also having to set up a triage area because
what is triage?
That's when you expect a large amount of patients or casualties to come in at one time, and you decide where they're going to go. Are they going to the operating room, to the floor? Are they just called the walking wounded, or do you feel that they're going to die? It's the way to figure out how to take care of the most amount of people in the shortest amount of time with a limited amount of supplies. And it's an area set up. When you watch MASH, when they first come on and the helicopters come and everybody runs out and they're yelling, send them this way or that way. It's that type of an area. But this hospital, what we ended up going to, we didn't go into tents. We were in a hospital. It was a Saudi military hospital. And their staff was made up of mostly foreigners, people outside of Saudi, the Irish, there was German, Polish, Egyptian, a lot of Egyptians, but all different other countries came in there to run this hospital. But they were not prepared to run a triage area. We were expecting 300 patients a day for a 2-week period. Like, that's what we had to gear up for immediately.
And when you were there, how did, you're now running it, how did the Saudis treat you and women?
Well, I was lucky in a sense because we landed on the 14th of January, and on the 15th of January we were supposed to be oriented to the hospital. We got in there and we had gotten word that there was some type of skirmish going on and we were going to get over 100 patients in. So I immediately had to get the staff and we had to set up an area quickly. And because we came in so aggressively and got it going and we're ready for the patients, I ended up getting more freedom within the system there. I was able to run the emergency room. And I had the American doctors as the backup, but I was allowed to do a lot more, but it was very hard. The nurses that were non-American, especially the Egyptians, we used to call them patient sitters. They basically just sit there with the patient. They don't really do anything. One is because they're not supposed to touch a man. The other thing is the system's not set up to allow them to. They can't start IVs. They can't do certain things spontaneously that nurses in America are trained to do. So they can't do that, and the doctors tend to do a lot of yelling and screaming at them. And they found it didn't work with the American nurses because the American nurses just couldn't put up with that type of behavior. So the American nurses maintained their professionalism, but maintained, you know, this is what we do and this is how we have to do it, and really tried to push that. The medical care is much different than we have in the United States. And it's not up to the same...
It's much different than we have in the United States?
It's not up to the same caliber as the our American physicians. So that was difficult also.
They had primarily non-American doctors?
Right. Well, it was a host facility hospital that was supposed to take care of all the host nations plus some Americans. And the unit I was with brought in American physicians, but there was a staff there already. So there was already the non-American physicians because they're there all the time.
Now, you were personally treated with respect.
I didn't feel that uncomfortable.
But of course, how did you treat your day? You stayed, you didn't, being married with 3 children, you were there probably in the evening and not going out. But how about the single nurses that might have wanted to go in the town?
There was no place to go. We were in a military hospital on a military post, but it's not here like the Arsenal. I mean, basically, there's only desert all over. There was no place to go. We worked. Almost everybody had to work 12 hours a day, up to 6 days a week, 7 days a week, especially because, you know, the air war started, so we were busy from the beginning. You know, everybody says a 100-hour war, but there were still things going on. And so we got the EPWs, the prisoners. We got the Iraqi citizens. We got the Kuwaitis.
EPW is the prisoner of war.
The enemy prisoner of war, yeah. The Iraqis, the Kurds, the Kuwaitis. See, we were getting them from the very beginning. So we were constantly busy because we had to get everything. We also were getting the Egyptian soldiers and the Niger soldiers as they were being injured, Polish soldiers, any of them. So we worked long hours, and they felt that we were probably, we had over 36,000 patients come through that hospital. They felt that we had
36,000 patients, even though we know here in the United States there were fewer than 100 Americans killed. But you had 36,000 patients. So because you had the enemy prisoner of war in addition to...
Right. Well, we had all the Allied forces coming through almost. The British had set up hospitals, you know, and others had set up, but we were close enough to the border and also had a large enough airfield, like a 747 was able to land there, that we were able to help with the evacuation of the patients to either their home countries or to other places for more care. So we really got everybody through us. Plus the Saudi government had to take over the prisoners, you know, from the Americans, so we were sort of that, the healthcare-wise, we were that contact point there.
Well, we were over in Amman, Jordan, and also Cairo, and when we were there, especially the people who came, the women who came from Saudi Arabia had just horror stories to tell. What was it like with the women?
You know, we were there for the holy month too, Ramadan, which started March 17th and went to April 15th or something. And that's their holy month. So we were there and we were hit with that besides everything else. But basically, the big thing they had, they didn't want women to be uncovered. And if you were in uniform, you were all right. But if you went into civilian clothes, they wanted long sleeves, long pants. Some people went out to, like, down to Riyadh, took a trip there and stuff, and they asked that they not wear uniforms since they were on a pass or leave, since they weren't working. And in order to do that, they wore their civilian clothes, but they had to wear a black kabaya, which is almost like this, goes down to your wrist, goes to your ankles, and ties shut, and keep covered. But if you weren't covered or dressed properly, outside of this military post, there were the religious police, and they had these big sticks, and they'd come around and they would hit you or knock you or something to let you know you're improperly dressed. And if you didn't observe the prayer time, we didn't have to pray, but, you know, the stores might shut down or something, and you had to show respect for that.
Well, of course, we were seeing it from this end, and some of the women, if Saudi Arabian women, were really refusing to go along with some of the old traditions. Did you see, what kinds of changes? Did you see any of those changes while you were there?
In the hospital, we saw more from the other Arabic nurses. There are no Saudi nurses that I know of. Their women don't work in the hospitals. They're not, because that's considered dirty, is my understanding. Now, there were none in that hospital. I mean, obviously I don't know the whole country, but that's my understanding. There aren't any. So the Egyptians and the ones from Jordan and places like that, they were, you know, they had been all wearing like the white to cover their heads as a nursing cap, but they'd cover themselves. Well, they were starting to let their hair show, or they were starting to become more active or aggressive in nursing treatment, and they were much more outspoken, or they'd start to yell at doctors and stuff. But when you were outside and you saw the other women, I mean, they were dressed head to foot in black. I mean, faces were covered in everything.
How did they had several parts to this ensemble that they wore, didn't they?
They had a piece that seemed to come and cover their head, and then there was like a black mask with eye cut out, a piece that went over their face, but then there was another piece that covered the eye cut out, and then a black veil over their head, and then this black thing covering their arms. And then if you saw the real, they'd have black gloves on also.
How do you feel that this war is going to change some of that?
I don't know. People in the hospital didn't want us to leave because they thought that we brought a lot of positive changes to them. We cut out a lot of bureaucracy that they had. Their hospitals are run by the king almost. I mean, it's very, very centralized. I mean, everybody has to do the exact same thing in every hospital within the country. You know, the hospital itself can't make its own decisions. And we brought in a lot of changes that they liked, but they were very concerned that it would immediately go back to the old way. They were also concerned that once we left, it would be much harder on them, the people that worked there, that it would get very, very strict again to try to wipe out anything we did.
How was it, how did you bring about the changes? What are some of the changes that you brought, cutting out the bureaucracy?
Oh, they had things in this hospital where if you got somebody in that we had gotten in, it was an American soldier that was severely injured, what we called a body crunch, had a jeep, big deuce and a half had rolled on top of him, all his bones were crushed. He had to go to surgery immediately, and we knew he was coming. Well, to them, you don't just admit to the operating room. I mean, the man was going to die. You have to bring him to the emergency room. You have to evaluate. Then you have to call in the surgeon. You have to call in this one, and everybody sits around and discusses it. Well, we didn't. Yeah. Well, we didn't do that. The commander of this unit was an orthopedic surgeon, and he knew the patient was coming in, and he had come down because we didn't know what was going on. So he was there, and he just said, "That's it. Just admit him to the operating room. Don't stop." And because he was so forceful, we immediately had done that. And they were like, the doctors, they were like, "This is just wonderful, admitting right to the OR." They just thought that was great. And we did a lot of things like that, where we were able to admit directly to different areas and cut out a lot of that type of stuff.
So this was a bureaucracy that you were able to accomplish, cutting some of that out.
Right, make it easier.
What was the most terrifying time for you? The first soldiers that came in?
No, the first time was the second day we were there, and just prior to going to the hospital, we had a meeting, and the alarms went off. And we had a mask, and everybody had to lock and load their weapons. And I thought, we've only been here 12 hours. Is it going to be like this the whole...
Lock and load their weapons.
Yeah, well, see, that went off, and the alarms went off, so they didn't know if a scud had come or not, or what was happening. It was the alarm to get ready. So that probably was the first time it was like, oh my gosh. But then later on what had happened is we had 7 scuds come within a quarter mile of us. And I didn't personally see them because I was inside the hospital, but my guard outside had saw the scud get hit by the Patriot, and there were 7 of them in a 2-day period. So that started getting nerve-wracking because we didn't know. I'd say for the first month we were there, I mean, we were getting up all night, 2 to 3 times a night, putting on our masks. The alarms would go off, and we'd have to mask up and everything in case it was a chemical attack. It did get to the point that you were able to go back to sleep with your mask on. No, we got that comfortable.
You actually were able to go back to sleep with the mask on?
Yes. It happened so much. You were getting up so much, and we just fall back asleep. We did.
And they said that we would hear stories, you know, where the mask itself was very uncomfortable, just getting it on and organized, and some would forget to do certain things. So you got used to that. And what was the time, what do you think that Americans being there, in addition to cutting out some of the bureaucracy, what do you feel you brought to this whole operation, the war and the Gulf?
I don't. It's hard because, you know, they treat life differently than we do. They have a different respect for life. I think we did a lot of heroics with our medical care. We treated them differently. They were, as they would come in, they would prefer the Americans. I think we treated them with more kindness or understanding or something. It's just, we just treated people differently than they do. They have a tendency when they come into the non-American staff to really yell at the patient. And yeah, it's really, it's a yelling, and it's like there's no kind of bedside manner at all. A lot of things are left up to Allah to handle. They don't worry about certain things, and if it happens, it happens. And nobody makes a mistake because they're not allowed to make a mistake. So if it happened, it happened because that's what Allah wanted. And there's not the digging into why did this happen, or is there something wrong, and should we try to look at it different ways. So I think we showed them a lot of what we could do, but I don't know if we'll make the difference because they're ingrained with that kind of thought process. I think the women were amazed because we drove, and they didn't want to see women drive. We weren't supposed to drive. They try to knock us off the road as we drive. And
who would actually be doing that, trying to knock you off the road as you
the Saudi men.
The Saudi men.
They would try to, you know, take their cars and try to push you off. And we used to, and they just drive unbelievably. It's a 2-lane road, and basically it's 6 cars all go in different directions. I mean, the car accidents they have are unbelievable, and they're not fender benders. I mean, usually somebody's always dead when there's a car accident, and there was always a car accident. It was unbelievable. They think nothing of going out and passing, but it's not passing like you know down here. We used to call it the Saudi squeeze. I mean, it used to be to see if they could get into the smallest space possible to pass you. It was just unreal driving.
That must have been pretty terrifying, just the driving.
It was. It was
fun to get back to Huntsville and see saneness again.
Right, and nobody thought Huntsville was sane for driving, but, you know, it was. Big difference.
What was the food like and the living conditions?
I was lucky. We were in buildings, so we did all right because we had this facility. Our biggest problem with living conditions probably was trying to deal with this multinational force. There was an awful lot of politics, working together, much different, slowness, lab work. You needed stat lab work. You know, for a cardiac patient, well, here it probably takes, for everything, maybe a half an hour. You get it. It would take us 3 to 4 hours there. We had somebody that needed blood immediately in surgery. It took 3 hours to get blood. It should have taken 20 minutes. I mean, crazy. So our turmoil was with that, trying to get things done. Others, everybody, almost all the other units were intense, DEP meds, which is a deployment medical unit. And the hospital parts were air conditioned for them. They're supposed to be the state-of-the-art hospital tent, but their living quarters did not have air conditioning. So that was very, very hot. The sandstorms you had to put up with were very bad. It was a very fine sand, and even just a breeze would bring it through, and it would go through everything. I had new boots that really ended up, and I wasn't out in the sand that much, ended up with holes in them because it just eats away at things, eats away at the cloth, the material. So water, they had the showers and things, except for those that moved out of Saudi and went further north. Then once they started moving north, they had to leave their water supplies back because it was too much to carry, especially getting ready for the war. So they would go without showers for a long time, you know, a week or so. So that was hard. The heat was very hot.
The women too? The nurses would have to go without it?
Yeah, everybody did if you had to go north, yeah, because the water was so limited. We had smaller, like, caches, combat hospitals, surgical hospitals go north, which were smaller groups. And we had some people from our unit in there, and they did a lot more traveling and roving up north. The larger units, the evacuations in the field, tended to stay back more, you know, towards the border.
How did the other nurses cope with it? You had respect because of your positioning.
I think, you know, I think the nurses did well. I feel they really did well. I mean, yes, there was complaint, and we weren't home, and we weren't with something, we were dealing with something new. The sorting men could be fresh, I think, because they didn't want, you know, women, they felt women shouldn't be doing this. One thing that we had found out was interesting. Part of their problem with it was the feeling that they supposedly protect their women. And that's part of this reason the women stay behind, the women don't talk, because they're going to keep the women out of all these problems. Well, they couldn't understand how American men would allow their women to go over there. So therefore, that must mean American women who are there are either no good or tramps or just no good and nobody cares about. So therefore, why should they? Which is a different kind of perspective on it when you look at it from their point. There were problems. I mean, they spit at you when you walked on the street sometimes, but it wasn't all of them. It was some.
How did the Saudi women treat you, or the women that were able to get to you?
Very well. I mean, it was very hard to communicate. The Saudi men tend to speak English, it seemed. The women didn't as much. But there'd be a lot, you know, they'd give you a victory sign or try to touch you. At one point we were out in Hoffer and they wanted us to sign books with, they wanted our autographs and where were we from and everything. And the kids would come up and say, thank you, and, you know, little words, whatever they could.
Mm-hmm. And they were trying to communicate to you that they did have gratitude that you came there.
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Did you have an opportunity to get acquainted with some of the other multinational forces, other women, other nurses?
They're Polish, the Filipinos were mostly, there were some German, and then the Egyptians, yeah. I think the Polish Peace Force that came over, I think, had a much more difficult time than anybody, and they were much more aggressive, even than the Americans, in trying to make their stand that they were women and they were going to do what they wanted, which was interesting, much more aggressive. But yes, we did. But that all took time to work, and that was very hard work because nobody speaks English. And of course, we assume everybody will, and nobody did. No, they did a little bit, but not much.
So how did you communicate?
A lot of sign language, a lot of pointing, and a lot of yelling, I think, demanding that they understand. And of course, they were very willing to attempt to learn English. Some of us picked up Arabic. I did not, but I am not good with language anyway, but some of us did. But, you know, it's hard. The Filipinos are very good, very language, yeah, the English, the Philippine, but they even had the Arabic down very well. They were very impressive.
So they could actually translate for you many times?
To an extent, yes. They were very good, yeah. And they had translators in the hospital that you would call when you would get in the non-American soldiers, and that helped a lot. But a lot of the Iraqis that came in spoke English. It was surprising how many did.
How did the other people feel, other nurses and people in the hospital, physicians, about the EPW, the enemy prisoner of war?
The Arabs felt that they were still all united under one Allah, and they were not as concerned about the Iraqis coming in. While the other nationalities didn't really like to get near them because they were afraid, because we didn't know what we were getting. So they were afraid to go near them as much as we were. We would go in, but it was difficult. But then you could see the difference. The ones we were first getting were the really skinny, the raunchy ones that you could tell that had been dragged out and had no training and hadn't eaten in a long time. And then we started to get the Republican Guard in, and they were the big muscle builders and huge and very, very frightening looking. It was a big difference. Even then we wanted to be careful with. But we had the MPs, the American MPs. We also had, like in the emergency room or on the floors, like one of the medics, if he had to, or she, would take a weapon and guard if we had to. And then we attempted to get the Saudi guards to help guard them too, so that helped.
How did you feel about Saddam Hussein still being in power?
It was very, very upsetting. I can see why they stopped if you saw the thousands that were coming in. I mean, we were just going in and rolling over all these people, and they were skinny. I mean, they were they were malnourished and everything. And I could see why we had to stop, because I think the rest of the world would have thought we committed a massacre. But I don't think they realized how bad it really was further up. Because, you know, I don't think they realized what he was really doing and what he did to the Kurds after. And at that point, we had already stopped. But I think there was a concern for what we had already done and what would people say. What we did, we ended up, the Corps of Engineers had to go in with bulldozers to bury the Iraqi soldiers. There were that many. So if you can imagine, you know, what would people think?
What do you think will happen now with that whole area of the country? What is your opinion?
I don't know. I really don't. I just know that we were put in a difficult position. We were helping to heal and the Iraqi civilians, putting them on buses to send them back, and they were getting shot at again. We were doing all these life-saving measures, but you know, amputations. And we would do all of this and save their lives, but where were the prostheses coming from? How were they going to survive in the desert? I think, you know, it's hard what we expect out of life and what they do. And I was just reading Time magazine and just looking at the destruction going on with the Kurds again. I mean,
it's not over for them, is it?
No, but they've been doing this for thousands of years.
Since Abraham and Isaac, and Abraham had Ishmael, and all of that.
I mean, it's just amazing how they treat one another.
What about your being allowed to worship God and read your Bible? We had heard that you weren't allowed to have a Bible, or, you know, that they wouldn't allow it. Of course you could have.
Now, I had mine. I had it in my duffel bag, and most of us, I think, did bring it. We had brought it. It was in the duffel bag. Nobody inspected it. Our church services were done in tents outside in other units. Like, I'm Catholic, so we had to go outside to a different unit that had it in a tent where there were no non-Americans. The Protestant services they held in our area were behind windows that had brown paper on them, so nobody would know. The chaplains obviously did not wear their crosses or anything. We were very careful about it.
How do you think people were responding internally? Do you think there were a lot of people committing their lives to the Lord and actually getting serious about what they believe and getting off the fence?
I think so. And it was very frustrating not to be able to do anything, or to have everything so hidden. You know, when Easter came and Good Friday, that was very frustrating. We went to service and you didn't feel like there was nothing special about the Easter service. But I think a lot of people did. They took to reading the Bibles more, or they were more aware that they were not allowed to practice it, so it became very, very important to be able to.
Boy, what a lesson for us, isn't it, Jean?
Yes.
That we need to really appreciate the fact that we can worship the Lord, God Almighty, freely in this country. And I thank you for going. You're my hero for going over there.
Thank you.
And you made it possible for us to continue. And I just feel such a tingle of excitement and appreciation and gratitude for the Jean Weavers of the world that took out from their business and their husband and their children and helped to defend our country. And thank you very much. Jean Weaver, I'm Bonnie Libhart. You're watching Vision Plus, and bless your heart for watching.
Give him praise, give him praise. Come into his presence with thanksgiving in your heart. Your voices raised, your voices raised. Give glory and honor and power unto him. Jesus, the name above all names. Come into his presence with thanksgiving in your heart and give him praise. Praise. Come into his presence with thanksgiving.